What is up? This is the Existential Stoic podcast. Have you ever wondered, hey, is there principles I could live my life by that maybe, I don't know, maybe make me a better person, make my life better, maybe make it easier to deal with all the things I struggle with? You're actually in luck. We're going to talk about Stoic principles to live your life by. I'm Danny here with my buddy Randy. What's up, Randy?
Yo, Danny. Yeah, not just any principles, the Stoic principles, because that's the trendiest thing ever.
That is the trendiest philosophy right now. It is interesting, right?
Hmm.
I'm just happy that some philosophy got some some recognition in the
Yeah,
general public, so I don't really care which one it is. It doesn't matter to me. They're all good.
that's a good
But
point.
I think this is good because like we were just actually mentioned in our previous episode too that you know, when you want to make things better in your life or live a better life, it takes constant reminder too and constant practice. And it's easy to forget. So like reminding yourself of these principles is also a good idea. So we can kind of just we'll go back and forth between them, I guess, and yeah,
We'll spitball them. Yeah.
spitball, see what we come up
What you
with.
got?
So the first one I think is the obvious. We talked about this a lot, but it is important to mention. I think it's one of the best principles to keep in mind, which is focus on what you can control. And this is the dichotomy of control, right? And essentially we can't control external events. We can't control what happens in the world. All we can really control is like our attitude, our thoughts, our actions and choices, right? So how we respond to things, the response we have, that's basically it. So our character, who we are as a person, we have some control over that, but everything else, I think we forget this a lot. A good example is like applying to jobs, right? Like you have control over like the resume you create, how you present yourself, so forth and so on. But you have no control beyond that on whether they pick you, whether you even get a call back. And so, but we often, I think, make that mistake of, thinking we should have control over things that we have zero control over it. And it makes us upset, angry, depressed, all these different things when really we need to like remind ourselves. And I think, remember when we had a Masamune and we were talking about this? And he actually talked about actually making a list too. Like he mentioned a clear example. I think it was like his fridge died or something, and he's in a New
Hmm.
York apartment up on a multiple story. And he's like, making a list of like, well, what actually is in my control here and what's not in my control. And I think that's a really nice way to approach this in a situation where you're struggling with it to kind of figure out like, okay, what can I actually have power over and what don't I? Making that clear.
Mm. Yeah, it's definitely an important one, and it kind of like helps resolve a lot of problems that you may have going on in your life. Because if you just
Yeah.
focus on what's in your control, and then the rest of it, you can just let go of it.
Yeah.
All right. So the next one that I have is live according to nature and reason.
Nice.
So align your life with nature as a rational, social being. Let reason guide your actions, not impulse or emotion. Oh my goodness.
I know, right?
Ugh. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I love the optimism of the ancient philosophers because they all thought, Aristotle says this too, right? That like human nature is defined by reason and sociability. Basically, we're social creatures and we're rational creatures. But we talked
Mhm.
about this a lot. Like, are we rational? Or is that something that we have to work for? Because I know it's like when you say it's your nature, it sounds like that should be easy to do.
Yeah. And also how they thought that it was like only a manly type of virtue, like rational was only because like the opposite of rational is just hysterical, but in I think Latin, like the root word hysterical, like hysterectomy comes from having a uterus.
Yeah.
So like
Oh, dude, it
it's
was a
just
total dig at women too. It was.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
let's be honest.
Yeah, but I remember this sometimes when I go to like social events where I just have to deal with other people because not I don't look forward to that many times. And it's like I remember them talking about being like a rational social being, like we're meant to be social. And I'm at these events and I'm just like, there's no way I'm meant to be social. Like
It's
not
draining.
possible.
It is
Yeah.
exhausting being social, yeah. But I think this is also a good reminder too, though, that like, you know, even if even if it's within our nature, and I think this is like where Aristotle says something like this, like we have the propensity to be virtuous. Like we it's in our nature that we have this capacity, but we still have to cultivate it. And I think that's an important thing to remember is like, yeah, we're rational, but we're also a lot of other things. And so in order to
Hmm.
really be rational, we have to cultivate it and make an effort to make that a principal sort of part of our character, right? Which is challenge. It's hard. It takes work. So it's not going to come simply just by, being, right?
Yeah.
The next one I have, and I like this one actually a lot, which is um I almost read the same thing, sorry. Practice acceptance, so amor fati, and this is like love your fate. And I actually like this. This is something Nietzsche actually picks up from the Stoics too, and really emphasizes a lot too. And the idea is like embrace whatever happens, good or bad, as an opportunity for growth. Don't resist reality, instead work with it. Nietzsche actually always said that we should reinterpret suffering and not see it as a negative, but as something positive because it's an opportunity for us to grow and overcome ourselves. And I always like that way of looking at it because so often we look at suffering as like a wall and this insurmountable obstacle. But in reality, most suffering is an opportunity for growth, right? It's an opportunity for changing something about our world, us as a person, the way we do things that would better us and make us, because now we've overcome this thing, now it won't be a burden in the future.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that as well because it's like life doesn't promise that things will go well, but what it does promise is like evolution and growth, and those always happen under tension and under strain and suffering and all this different stuff. So looking at how
But,
things are helping you in the long
well,
run. And plus,
it's
when you look back, you can
yeah.
connect the dots looking back, but when you're in it, you can't.
No, you can't. And the other funny thing too is like when when things are going well, you don't make big changes for self-growth. You just don't, right? When do people make like it's like when people like have a near-death experience or overcome a terminal illness, they make huge changes in their lives, right? When you hate your job, you might make a big change. But if things are going well, we're not the type of creatures that are going to make these big changes. So I think it's also important to remember this just because like this is kind of how it goes, right? That's why we want to evolve and change and adapt is because things are not the way we want them.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So I'll give some more Latin. I'll give memento mori. Remember, you will die. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. That's why I say really nasty things to people
All the
right
time.
now
Don't want to
because
forget that.
I might not be around to say it to them later.
Just in
But
case I get hit by a bus. You suck.
yeah, just wanted you to know you're a piece of, yeah. Anyways, so, but it is an important one to remember that you will die because a lot of people live like they're never going to die. And because of that, they don't do the stuff that they think is important. Like all these people with bucket lists. Oh my gosh.
I hate bucket
Dude,
lists.
there was this, I was talking with a couple of years ago, I was talking with this like 80 some year old guy who was telling me his bucket list. And it was to do something like that summer that I was speaking with
Climb
him.
Everest?
And it
No.
was, yeah, and it was coming up in a couple of weeks, and I was like, "Well, you should go." And he's like, "Oh no, I can't this year." I'm like, "Dude,
You're
bucket
80.
list. You're 80. Like, hello."
Well, I
Yeah.
think this is what happens, right? Is it becomes one of those things where like I think the problem with the bucket list is it becomes more a dream list.
Hmm.
And like it's like a list of your regrets that you're going to regret essentially because it
Yeah.
becomes a way to put things off. Well, I'll put it on my bucket list and it's like, well, I'm still doing all right, but it's like, well, all right, but at a certain point like your ability to, I think people forget too that our like we we ignore the fact that like we also physically change over the years and that we might lose mobility. We might lose the ability to do things easily. So it might make doing these things like I don't know. Traveling in your 20s is very different from traveling in your 40s, right? Like it's a lot
Hmm.
easier to travel when you're younger or to do
Dude,
things that are going to take a lot of
even
physical
physical activity. Like I go to the gym, I do some kickboxing with some guys who are half my age. And man, they do it 6 days a week, no problem. I do it twice a week and I'm like worn out.
Yeah,
And
because you don't
it's
recover as
something.
fast, right?
Hmm.
Like it's just
Yeah.
that's how it is. And I
Yeah.
think, yeah, if you ever struggle with this, remembering you will die, just read Meditations. He'll remind you every other
A lot.
sentence. It's
A
a lot.
lot.
But I also think
Absolutely.
this is a big one too, where like you look, you know, it really is clear that people deny their mortality to themselves because you look around and like it's like so many people are doing things that you just know like if they knew they were going to die. And I learned this so much from teaching biomedical ethics and covering like stuff about like end of life ethics because
Hmm.
there's every story where somebody overcomes like a terminal illness, they end up changing their life dramatically afterwards. And if that's like pretty much 100% of the time, then most of us are not living the life we really should be living, which suggests a lot, right? About like how we are as individuals, how we tend to just kind of accept what's easier rather than doing what's harder, all these things, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a book or the thing about the five regrets of the dying. That's an
Yeah.
important one.
Yeah.
And also when you were talking, I was thinking about how like people when they get older, because everybody plans for the golden years of retirement. But like you may have the most money and the most time at that time, but your health is going to be the worst. And there was this book by Peter Attia called Outlive, where he talked about that your mobility and your ability to actually have a good last 10 years of your life is almost completely dependent upon how much muscle you build when you're younger in life.
Yeah. Because how much mobility you're going to have later, right? Whether you're going to even be able to
Hmm.
get out of your chair and stuff like that.
Yeah, so if you're busy like not doing anything when it comes to health now and just thinking that the golden years will probably be spent on a lazy boy watching Jeopardy.
Well, that's the other thing is you don't know what's going to happen. Like I remember my one grandfather, like he had a leg aneurysm, had to get operated on. He was fairly mobile, but after the operation, he ended up getting pneumonia, got stuck in the hospital, screwed
Mm,
everything up because he was in bed, and after
mm,
that, lost like all mobility. And it was like
mm.
so his life changed like just dramatically from one event, right?
Yeah,
And
that
it's not that
sucks.
out of the ordinary to have that happen, right? Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, so the
Give us another
next
Latin word.
Oh, this one doesn't really have Latin. Well, it has arete if you want virtue, right? So
Uh,
cultivate virtue above all. And I think this one's
mm,
actually important because you know, it's interesting to me that we forget this, like, for the Stoics, for really all the ancients, virtue correlated to character, right? And character growth. And they thought that was the most and literally the Stoics thought that was the only good. That they thought that, virtue, being virtuous was sufficient and necessary for living a good life or flourishing. And I mean, I know we totally don't think this anymore, but it's interesting to think that, they thought that was the most important thing was cultivating your character and your own growth and spending
mm,
time on that, like that you're acting right. Wisdom, courage, justice, temperance, like all of these, right? Not over imbibing and stuff, doing the right thing at the right time in the right situation. And I wonder, like, they put so much emphasis on that, like, why do we not?
that's a good question.
I guess
Yeah.
because it's personal responsibility, maybe. I don't know.
Because virtue is hard, you know? You can and plus you can virtue signal and everybody else will think that you're virtuous,
Yeah,
you know, which
yeah.
is the crazy stuff. I mean
Which is,
that
it is funny, right? It's like you're pretending to be, it's like, well, why don't you just be a good person? I hate that so much. I
because that's
can't
too
stand it.
hard.
Yeah, it's like,
It's much easier to virtue signal and get all the thoughts and prayers and high fives and all that garbage.
well, I wonder too, like, this is just, I don't know. I have no idea if this is true, but like, we're exposed to so much information around the world now. Like I could look on my phone and find out what's happening in like New Guinea, in Brazil, what pains people are going through in somewhere in China right now. But like historically, that was not the case. Like these guys, when you're talking about the Stoics, they knew what was going on in their town or their city that they were living in to a point. Really, only so much that was going on there. Beyond that, like by the time the news reached them, it was over. The
And a
thing
lot of
probably
times
was
you didn't
done.
even know the world existed,
No,
you
they had
know?
no idea how big it was, right? Like, so I
Hmm.
wonder too if like it's a problem of information. We're like on information overload, so we can't
Well,
even
dude,
focus on having a good.
we have a 50,000-year-old brain. Like we're
Yeah,
operating on 50,000-year-old hardware
yeah.
and
Well, and
trying to
it's
run
like, and I
some
think
brand new
that's why like we
program.
forget about being the importance of being virtuous in our community because we're so stressed out by all these things happening that we have no control over, right? And that goes back to that dichotomy of control too.
Dude, and it is like I'm still waiting and praying for it to be recognized as like a legitimate addiction because so
Yeah.
many times like people will be like, I know it's so like politics is so terrible and I feel so bad about talking about it,
But let's
but I
talk
can't help
about
myself. I love it. Yeah. And it's
it.
like and they say the same thing about the news. I know the news is terrible, but I just love watching it. And it's just like,
There's
yeah.
just something about being angry all the time that I just get addicted
Hmm. Yeah,
to.
exactly. Exactly. So I'm going to give another Latin word.
Woo.
This one is premeditatio malorum. Rehearse the worst. This is an interesting one. I heard about this in Tim Ferriss's book back when, I think 2008 or
Yeah,
something
we
like
usually
that, where he
translate
said,
this as like negative visualization now, right?
yeah, visualize potential hardships ahead of time to prepare your mind. So, like, if you dream about going broke, enact that every once in a while. Go live on the street, go spend your day at the library, do something. Because then, if the worst happens, you've already experienced it, and it's probably not as bad as you think.
Well, this is also a good one for sort of recognizing kind of the how our reactions differ over time. There was a good example, I think it might have even been, I don't remember whose book this was in, but they were talking about like, like they put a shirt in the wash that wasn't dry, or they dried a shirt that they weren't supposed to dry, and it came out super tiny shrunk, right? And they were
Huh.
really upset because it was a great shirt. They loved the shirt. It was brand new. It was the first time they washed it, right? And it was like, oh, I ruined the shirt, and they were really upset. But then they were like, well, okay, stop. What if I visualize this happening 10 times?
Alex
100 times.
Hormozy, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe that was 1,000 times, right? Well,
Yeah.
after 1,000 times, would you really care that much? It's like, all right, it happened. Whatever, the shirt shrank. It always shrinks. I move
Hmm.
on with my life. And I think that's a good way to think of this. It's like, yeah, these things seem really, really painful and really, they seem like a really intense experience in the moment, but that's because it's just the first time you've encountered it. If you've encountered it a lot, you realize that it's not that big of a deal. That's just something
Hmm.
that happened, right? And I think this is a
Yeah.
great way to help us kind of mitigate our response to things.
True.
Right.
Yeah.
Uh, Next one is practice mindfulness and presence. Try to confine yourself to the present. And this is like one of the hardest ones, right? Don't dwell on the past. Don't or worry about the future. Be in the moment. Because most of us, I think, are living in the past or the future, right? We're waiting for this thing to happen that's going to make us happy. We're constantly reliving some bad thing, and that's dictating our lives. And I think if you really think about it, how many of us are controlled by past experiences, negative or positive, or future experiences that we hope for that haven't happened yet, when we're not even living our lives in the moment.
Yeah. And it's a tricky one because it's kind of almost like a paradox. Like even though we are living in the past or the future, we're doing it in the present.
Yes.
So like we're exchanging our present for just being angry at some
Well,
future or
and it's
past.
also tricky too because it's like you still want to plan, obviously. You right? You want to do th I mean, this goes back to like being in control, right? You want to do the things that are right that are going to get you to that goal you want, but you can't, and I think this is the hard part, right? You can't just daydream yourself out of reality either, or, let these things dictate
You can certainly
everything.
try.
You can try.
All right. I got, I think, two more.
Okay.
Uh, so practice voluntary discomfort. This one is like a very stoic type of
Yeah.
thing when you think about it, but practice denying yourself pleasures or comforts. This builds strength, gratitude, and anti-fragility. This is a really interesting one because we live in a very comfortable society. Pretty much everything we do is to gain pleasure and avoid pain. And I remember hearing something about this
I
in the
hate being
book.
uncomfortable too.
Oh, dude, totally. The what is it? The something about hurrying. I've read some book,
Oh,
the
oh,
something of hurry.
yeah,
I
yeah.
forget the name of it. Anyways,
It was
really
a
good
good
book.
title. It's catchy. I
Yeah,
just can't remember it
exactly.
either now.
But what he talked about, because like we're so in a rush to get stuff done, and he's like, if you actually go the opposite direction, it'll improve your life. So like, for instance, when we all go to the supermarket and we're checking out, we look for the shortest line, and then if it changes, we go to the next one. And he's like, okay, from now on, whenever you go to the supermarket, look for the longest line and go there. And like do these things that kind of get you uncomfortable, because that will help you because life is going to be uncomfortable. And if you get used to it, then it's not that bad.
A lot of philosophers talk about this, right? It's like
The
conditioning
ruthless
ourselves.
elimination of hurry.
There you
That's what it
go.
was.
Yeah. And it's
Yeah.
like, but it's also like conditioning ourselves, right? To recognize because most of these responses we have of a discomfort, it's a bullshit thing we've made up in our heads. That my life's going to be worse if I don't get out of the grocery store as fast as possible, or if I'm not in the fastest line, or somehow I'm screwed over if I have to wait. It's like, and all these things that we feel like we're rushing to do, they're all made up BS. So it helps us see like that the meaning we're placing in these things isn't actually really there. It's us making it seem so, you know, so important that we do it now, right? And also
Yeah.
that rushing around makes us not present. So I think that's a really good one. Yeah.
Hmm.
There's two more I'll mention real quick, which is serve the common good, and this was a big one for the Stoics, right? Recognizing that you're not just an individual, you're in a community, right? And being there for that community, being part of your community, doing things for the good of it, but also gratitude and perspective. And I think this is a huge one too, which is being grateful for things, being thankful for things, taking a step back and like celebrating our wins, right? And having perspective too on how much these things really matter too is important. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, those are a couple good ones. Gratitude's really important. We both talk about the small delights practice where you
Oh
write down a
God,
few
yeah.
things that you're grateful for.
Awesome.
And I noticed like when I stop doing that, my life starts kind of spiraling. in a down
I
direction.
noticed
So
that too because I
it's
have
an
stopped
important
it several
practice.
times and I kind of going back to it because I'm like, man, everything really sad and negative now.
Yep. Exactly. And on that same line, keep a philosophical journal. So you
Yeah.
could be the next Marcus Aurelius Meditations. But basically reflect on your actions, thoughts, what matters, and it helps internalize your principles and track your growth. But also like it just writing down stuff, so helpful, such a lost practice.
We don't live in a society that really cultivates reflection at all. And I know people, a lot of people too, like it's funny because if you talk about things like this, it's like real conversations and nobody wants to have them. So if that's you, well, then do it in a journal, right? Because nobody's going to have to read it. It can just be between you and yourself, but it gives you a chance to actually reflect on really important things in life, so that you don't need to have a near-death experience to realize maybe you're not living the best life or the life that's right for you, right? You can figure that out maybe ahead of time by doing some self-reflection. Yeah.
Hmm.
But there you have it. Some Stoic principles to live by. Check us out on YouTube wherever you get your podcasts. If you guys have episode suggestions, you can email us or leave a comment in show notes. We'll be back later this week with another episode. Until then, though, later, Andy.
Later, Danny.